Thank you all for coming to this version, the June 2nd, Tuesday, June 2nd version of our webinar series. This is one that's been requested quite a bit. Looking forward to doing this one. I've been chatting with our co-host about some neat things. I've learned a lot already just by chatting with him, and looking forward to learning a few new things here during the webinar itself today. So we have a couple of things we always like to take care of when we first start up. We've got some folks that are joining us. They've got their cameras turned off, but AIM employees and staff and folks that are helping us. Because what you should be doing is turn on, you should have a big button part of your Zoom that you can turn on and turn on your question and answer panel, Q&A button there. Make sure that's turned on and put that up there where you can see it. Of course, the chat box, make sure you've got that turned on. On your chat box, make sure that down there at the bottom of it where it says, where you type your message, there's a little pull down there. Make sure it's not on the default of just all panelists, because that's only going to be seen by myself and the AIM guys that are helping us out here. But when you click on that, make sure you click on all panelists and attendees. That will then make sure that everybody that's in the chat can see what you say. Pardon me, see what you say, and then you can have the conversations back and forth. Keep all those conversations over there. Maybe a few other things we talk about, keep them in the chat box. For questions that you want answered or seen during this presentation, make sure you type those into the question and answer box. That's where we want to put those. Then our guys will either answer them with a quick response and put those off to the side, or they'll mark them for us for Mark and I to answer during the webinar itself. So keep that in mind. It's we look forward to lots of questions and some good motorcycle information. So with that, let's start off with just a quick idea of where we're going to kind of head. Again, this is motorcycle data analysis, what to look for in bike data. So what we're going to do is Mark, our co-host Mark, we're going to talk about him in just a moment in more detail. He sent me some data that is from some information he had, talk about what is different than some of the stuff that we have been looking at in different webinars, and we'll take a look at that and go through it in detail. When you see something, if we're not covering it, make sure you throw it up as a question. We're going to be driven a little bit more by questions. We're going to be basically live data the entire time, and expecting that some of the questions are going to drive us to show some different things. So be ready for that. Okay. So with that, let's jump to the next slide. Our co-host this time, I'll have him do a bit of a self-introduction in just a moment, but we've been chatting with Mark. Mark's been a long-time AIM user, data user, coach of many motorcycle riders around the country, and because of that, he's got just tons of great feedback on information that he understands how to not only to apply in the motorsport sense, but then also to share with students, including the Mid-Ohio's Performance Track Riding Motorcycle Program, where he's the chief instructor. So very highly skilled. I love that picture on the left there. You can see the solo on the tank right there in front of his helmet, in front of his face shield. So I've been using these products for a while. Thanks for joining us, Mark. I do appreciate it. Give us a little bit more of more information about yourself.
Nice to see everybody. Nice to meet everybody. I've been, I believe the first AIM product that I used was the Gold Dirac system in maybe 2003-ish, maybe even earlier. I can't remember exactly. I mean, I started out doing endurance, and I owned Vezra Suzuki. That was my team, and we did. We were a national endurance series, and we were 8-time champions. I had to take a motorcycle and fit it to 3 different riders and do 4, 6, 8, and 24-hour races. So having data helped with that, because everyone rides different, and you had to be it was a juggle with setup. So
I'll bet. And thank you for coming in here. You've got a program, a website that you talk about rider development. The link is up there if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about Mark. 57riderdevelopment.com. We'll get you even a little bit more information about Mark, and be able to contact him. His email address in the upper left hand corner, I'm sorry, as well. So Let's start this off, however, with a poll, as we normally do. We've got a poll here that talks about what AIM hardware do you use. Again, this is a very handy thing for us. We're watching very closely what people are using, and then trying to create our webinar, information around that, right? So of course it's never, it's never, 100% one way or the other. So we build some balance into this, but it's very good to see and understand. So thank you all for doing that. We'll leave that up for just a couple more moments, and then we'll move on. Mark is based out of, while you're finishing that up, Mark has raced not only bikes and but also four-wheel, cars and automotive stuff. Sounds like from talking with him and what he just said, they're very much into endurance racing, that side of this program, as well as the sprint stuff. But and then a veteran Mid-Ohio instructor, spends a lot of time there. Doesn't live too far from there, and spends every time I've called him, let's put it this way, every time I've called him, he's been at Mid-Ohio when we've been chatting on the phone. So that's pretty good. I'm going to end that polling here in just a minute or so, in just a second or two, and then we'll move on to starting the program. So let's end that program there, and let's do this. And I'm going to jump. We're going to do something just a little bit different for those of you that just move the mouse away. I'm going to start another poll right away, because since we're going to jump right in and we're going to depend on a lot of questions from you, I've got a new poll item that I'd like to launch right now, and ask you some questions. And Mark, watch this, and we will share the results of this one so everybody can see it. This one is when viewing your motorcycle data or other data, however, if you're not a motorcycle racer, this is, tell us what you think you would do when you're viewing your data. What are the most important? And it's multiple choice. You could pick them all if you wanted, but please, maybe top 3 or something. What are the most important data items for you? What do you like to look at, right? And speed, RPM, gear position, lean angle, braking, throttle, driven line, and then towards the bottom there, I go through any number of them, and then towards the other, at the end, we've got one that says other. And if you select other, and that's great, we only have 10 spots to put things in here. If it's other, go ahead and select that, but then go over to the chat box and type in other dash, and then whatever that other thing that you're after. I would love to know that, so when we're building some things in the near future, what we maybe do if Mark wants to come back later and come back in and say, hey, let's do a little bit more of an advanced one or something on motorcycles. It'd be nice to know. So perfect that you're doing that. Looks like we're about half, 52% of you have voted on this. We'll leave this going for maybe another minute, or maybe a little bit less than a minute, and we will then we'll end that polling, and then we'll share that with everybody and let everybody take a look at it.
How about if I tell you what I would?
Okay, do that while we let everybody finish up.
For sure, to me, the line is the most important thing. Everything. I mean, if you can't be online, if you're offline and you're everything else just has to. Even if you slow down to get online, being online is the most important thing, safest thing, also. Mm-hmm. So.
Perfect. And we're gonna and line is we're gonna talk about. We have 4 basic things we're gonna chat about in depth today. Some of them many sub programs, but one of them is we're gonna take a look at the motorcycle line, and we're gonna take that data and take it out into Google Earth, and Mark is gonna discuss how you might attack certain types of corners and showing the driven line on the NCM track in Kentucky. So we will be doing that one on top of it. Okay, we've got quite a few of you voted on that one on the polls. Let's end that polling, and then let's bring it up and let everybody take a look at what the numbers kind of were. Let's share the results. And so here are your results. The number one is at 64% is braking. Mark will be talking about that a little bit as well. And then pretty close to that, the next 2 is throttle and speed. So we're kind of that whole driver input kind of stuff on that. And then driven line is there with a pretty decent number. RPM, all things we're going to talk about today. Lean angle is probably in there about in the middle at 43%. and bike health 23%, understeer, oversteer a little bit. And I've seen some questions already on suspension, chassis, setup stuff. That one maybe Mark will touch on it just a tiny bit here today, but that's a little bit advanced. That maybe that would be a second one. So I appreciate that. I'm gonna stop sharing those results so everybody has a pretty good idea of what how all of you voted. I appreciate that. I appreciate that. So let's stop sharing those results and let's put that off to the side. The next slide that we have here is saying that, hey, we're going to go right to live data. Mark and I chatted about this. We could have done some screen captures and some other things, but we felt that we wanted to make this one as interactive as possible. So what I'm going to jump into a new share, and we're going to jump right into Race Studio. Come on, there we go. I'm going to do I have a user profile set up for Mid-Ohio Bike, and then I'm going to turn on a couple other channels here just for fun. So we've got some. I'm going to turn that off. I've got some data here loaded up. It's some data from Mark that he sent to me, and it has just some interesting data. It's solo data, I think in this case, right? No, this one might be Evo 4, but it's same data as if you had a solo. Generally speaking, with connected to an ECU, you'll get a lot of this same information. Of course, you'll only have the GPS-based channels if you just have a normal solo without the ECU connection. So, but we're going to talk about some different things with some deeper data here to begin with, and then we'll get into the driving line and maybe some of the GPS-based stuff. So, Mark, I'm going to kind of turn this over. I'll run the mouse, and you just kind of point out, some of the different areas that you think you'd like to chat about, and talk about this lap at Mid-Ohio and some of the basics.
Well, I mean, first thing when someone comes to me and they want me to look over their lap in Mid-Ohio, one of the first things I look at is one, their line. Are they tracking out? Are they using on the track? A motorcycle is a very you want to be on the edge of the tire the least amount of time. So you need to get the turning done, but you want to get it stood up as you're adding throttle. So there's kind of a so you need to track out when you're in the middle of, say, turn 1 at Mid-Ohio, and it's the fastest corner at Mid-Ohio, and I think at the apex it's close to 80 miles an hour. It's a fast corner, but it's easy to overbrake into one, and it's also it's easy not to get, not to finish the corner. So if you're not finishing a corner, then you're giving up a lot in the middle of the corner. So the first thing I look at is their line and see if they're getting, to track out. Turn 1 is a, if you look at the map and you actually see where my throttle trace is, it's pretty early. Could you bring up the other map?
The regular track map?
Yeah, please.
This one?
Yep.
Okay, let me bring this up. Let me just resize this a little bit, and we'll have them side by side.
Okay.
Put this here. We'll bring this one up here so you kind of look at the differences. Oops, there we go. And we'll look at driving line in a little bit better way in Google Earth here towards the end of the webinar. So we'll see that even more so in a little bit, obviously.
Right. So I mean, basically, I'm looking at where you're getting to throttle and making sure you're tracking out in turn 1 there.
Okay. Throttle is this one here on the second one up from the bottom is the throttle position. So right here's where he's cut the throttle right here, and then rolling along and doing all his braking, doing all his leaning over, getting ready, and then starting to squeeze on the throttle right at this point right here, right at the apex, right?
Yeah, there's a little bit of maintenance throttle there just to set the suspension. Kind of gets the weight transfer a little bit on a motorcycle, and then it's a slow, consistent roll on and using up all the track on the exit.
Gotcha.
And for Mid-Ohio, It depends on the size of bike you have, but I gear all my thousands. Sorry.
It's funny, Mark talked about this earlier. If he was on a small bike, 600s, or even there's some classes that are even like 250cc, really low horsepower bikes, and the different styles in line and in how you attack the track is just is way more varied in a bike than what I normally see in cars that are high horsepower versus low horsepower and momentum type things. So I appreciate that as well. That's kind of interesting information.
Sorry about that. My phone rang. It came through my computer.
Oh,
and yeah, sorry about that. I lost my train of thought there.
And getting back on the throttle at the apex and moving forward, and
Yeah.
standing the bike up as you get to full throttle right here.
Yeah, and going back to the gear selection. So when I'm looking at if someone has a smaller bike, a 600 or a 750 or a 400, is hilarious how much throttle you're at. You're almost always at full throttle, and the TPS looks upside down if you look at a small bike. And so I'm looking at where they're shifting. The big bikes, I like to gear them extra tall. If you notice in the data, I'm only using 5 speeds out of 6.
Oh,
and
let's turn on the gear position. There's the gear. There's the gear position right here.
I'm widening the gearbox basically. So
okay.
In Mid Ohio and a lot of tracks, NCM included, you want to shift less. The thing has so much power. So what I try to do is calm the bike down, gear it big, and make it easier to ride. And the thousands have so much power. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But like say a 600 and 750, you do a lot more shifting. Like you come out of one at Mid Ohio and you'll catch probably up to 4th gear, and head up to the chicane. And the chicane's a pretty important corner. It's 120 mile an hour entrance. It's pretty good. And it's about hitting your marks going in the chicane, and just making sure people are hitting the marks and getting the right gear coming in, because from the middle of the front straightaway to the top of the keyhole, that's all uphill. So it's really easy. I can find a lot of time with somebody from when they get off the throttle in the chicane to when they get up to the keyhole, because they're coasting, because they feel like they shouldn't be back. If you look at my throttle trace, I'm back on the gas quite hard after I get in the chicane, kind of charging up to the keyhole.
Okay.
Just to keep your momentum. You don't want to scrub up too much speed in that uphill.
We talked about in some earlier webinars with I think James Clay talked about using the track layout and the slope of the track, a channel that we have available to us, and show that if the track is going up, of course you're being forced into more physical grip with the tires being used, and you need to know that and use it, of course, just like what you just talked about.
Yeah, if you did a track walk there, you'd be amazed how uphill it is. And then it's the same thing when you come out of the keyhole. It's dropping away from you, and which when you're coming out of the keyhole, it's easy to get on the throttle too early, because you want to. The length of that back straightaway is determined by where you get to the throttle in the keyhole. So what it is a patience corner. When you think you're ready to get to throttle, usually you're too early there. And on a car, you usually get understeer and head towards the edge of the track. But on a bike, it puts you in the wrong place, and then you have to add lean angle, which you don't want because you're trying to get to throttle. So getting a little bit wide. I don't use a lot of, I double apex the keyhole, but I don't get past center seam in the keyhole before I start bringing it back down to the bottom. And really you want to, what I look at is how they're getting to throttle in the keyhole. You want to be one time to throttle. And if you look at my trace there, I wasn't one time right there. I started off one time, but
and then I had to come back down.
Yeah, there was a moment there.
And this, by the way, just so everybody understands, he went out and did 3 laps. We're looking at the very first one. If I pull this over, the second lap was he was able to get there, and maybe just a little bit of a wheelie or something held him from going full. And by the time he got to the third lap, he got good tire temperatures and was going. There was just a small little lift for either a tire spin or for a wheelie or something, and well onto the front straight. In fact, if you look closely, it's actually at a shift, right after a shift. So we're looking at that one early lap, and that's why you're seeing a little bit of this. So go ahead, Mark.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
My computer did something again. Huh? That was weird. I missed the last half of that. My computer, when Siri just opened up for some reason. I don't even know why.
What we talked about was we were looking at your first lap of this session, and when we actually get to the fourth lap, when you're actually, the tires are warm and things are starting to get into the flow here, you went to throttle like you were talking, and that there was just a little bit of a release, but it was right at a gear shift, and for a tire spin or a wheelie or something that happened with that. These are very, very powerful bikes. So
yeah, that for sure is an upshift right there. You can see it on a gear position, and you really, those bikes, they have wheelie control, but it's still 200 horsepower still wants to wheelie, and then you have it's a fine balance with wheelie control of having too much interaction. It slows you down too much, so you still have a slight bit of lift when you're going.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
the other one that we kind of went past, and I want to go back to that previous lap. I'm just dragging this across to the bottom. Was braking. Let's talk a little bit about. There's a big, not big difference, but there is a difference in braking. How you brake with a motorcycle versus how you brake with cars or other things on a road course, even karting. The difference being that you can see here where he went after the brakes coming into turn 1, and you can see this release and then a little bit more pressure, and you see that in down here at the end of the back straightaway as well. And in cars, we've had other driver coaches and data folks that have co-hosted talk about that's something we don't want to do too much in a car. We don't see that too often. And but in a bike, with the way the weight transfers and getting all the weight up on the front, and the fact that you use little, if no, rear brake, you're doing some things with the front brake. Let's talk about that as a difference in car data versus bikes.
Yeah. So when I'm like, say that's turn 1 right there. It's a short little straightaway when you're looking at turn 1 from the pit lane, but it's a 100 and at race pace, it's probably 130 mile an hour entrance to that corner.
Yeah, even on your outlap here, you're 127.5. So yeah, you're hauling.
But it's really easy to over brake into there too. So what I usually do is, I'm on the brakes and I kind of set my entrance speed, but I don't want to get off them because I don't want to unload the tire. I want to keep the tire loaded. On a motorcycle, it's just like a car, where when you get on the front brakes, the contact patch widens. Well, imagine on a motorcycle, you have a tire that's like this. It's not a flat tire. When you initially brake, when you're straight up and down, and that initial tip in, that kind of controls the contact patch for the whole corner until you get back to throttle and unload that front tire. So it's typical for someone new to this that'll lose the front in the middle of the corner, not know what happened, is probably because he didn't load the brakes. He didn't get on the brakes enough to load the tire. So that initial hit is actually loading the tire, and then I'm off the brakes because I don't want to scrub too much speed off. I want to keep that tire loaded and not scrub off the speed.
Gotcha. That's why we see the dip here. That's why we see maybe down here as well.
Yeah.
Okay. And some of these other ones are just while we don't see it in all of your braking, it's because some of those are just pulling a little bit of speed out to set the bike, right?
Yeah.
Like this one here.
And some of the like off the back straightaway there, that sometimes I'm on the brakes, and then I'm like off the brakes and I'm like, nope, I'm going too fast, so I gotta slow down a little bit more.
That normal driver rider adjustments, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, I just wanted to chat about braking a little bit, because that there is a difference there than what maybe we've chatted about in the past. So yeah. Perfect. Okay, and what's the next thing down the line here that you would probably want to be looking at?
Well, so now we're headed down the back straight at Mid Ohio, and if you look at my GPS data, it just looks like kind of a little bend right there. It doesn't look like much of a kink. We call it the kink at Mid Ohio, and I try to straighten that up as much as possible. So I don't really, you can see it on the data. The RPM will pick up for a second and then drop. But there's a lot of like the smaller bikes that's really crucial on gearing when you go through a corner like the kink, that you can, you get your last gear and then you're in sixth gear and you get on the side of the tire and the bike revs up. And then if you snap it up too quick, you actually lose some mile an hour down the back straightaway. But say like my 1000 doesn't hard, it's still accelerating. If you look at the GPS data, it's still going, yeah. But a 600 or a 400 or, some of the small bikes, it's pretty critical. And then you go to Daytona where you're on the banking and you're on the side of the tire, and then the timing of when to straighten up to get down the back straightaway, it's the gearing, on a car, you have a tire, you're the whole way around the racetrack, it's the same gearing basically. So
perfect. There's a great discussion. There's a couple of questions that have come in that maybe we ought to just touch on real quickly. But what size and what make of bike is this that we're looking at here, Mark? Give everybody an idea of what this is.
This is a 2017 and up GSX-R 1000. This is my race bike version of it. I have a coaching bike version of it that I use, like the NCM data is for my coaching bike.
Gotcha. But both the same basic bike, probably one just not quite as complex as the other.
Same ECU, same suspension, just street version.
Perfect. And then the other one, you can control the front and rear brakes separately. What is this chart showing? This chart is showing front brake pressure, I suppose, right, Mark? And that and how much rear brake do you use relative to the front when you're racing your bike or doing your laps?
Yeah, that's just front brake. I'm not a rear brake kind of guy. I only use it when I'm going off through the grass, and I try not to do that too much. But I do have a 2020 R1 Yamaha that has it still has ABS on it. Now I don't mind it. A lot of racers take that off. I like it because you have brake pressure in the AIM data. It's awesome, and you can see front brake requested, rear brake requested, and then the actual pressure at the caliper, front and rear. And it's got a really nice link braking system, and there's not much pitch in the bike for stock suspension. It doesn't pitch as much because it's using that rear brake. But I still can't get my foot off the foot peg to push on the rear brake. So
we've talked a lot about that on our own before, as well as the part of your handling is set up by how you're using your pressure on your feet pegs, and where in the corner you pressure the outside versus the inside, and sometimes that keeps you from moving that your right foot over to the brake pedal, it sounds like.
Yeah. I pivot on the foot pegs at the ball of my feet. I use a lot of foot pressure to feel grip. So it's hard for me to reach up and push on that. Even though I shift with my left foot, my right foot is pretty much primarily just pivoting on the edge of the foot peg. So.
Perfect. So we talked about brake pressure a little bit. And I'm gonna turn off a couple channels. I'm gonna turn this off and make this a little bit bigger. I'm gonna try to turn off a couple of channels here real quickly, and we'll leave throttle position on. I'm gonna zoom in on this this end of this straightaway and I'm going to bring up the GPS gyro, which is a channel. I'm going to exaggerate it a little bit for example for here, where 0 is when the bike is straight up, and this is 5 degrees. He's peaked on his rotation or the lean angle of the bike right in this area, and he's flat to the floor. And you can see as he starts to stand the bike up, come off of it, the speed is still going. He's still just flat to the floor. He's not shifting or anything, and the RPM dropped for a little bit when he and then starts to come back up. There is a change in RPM as you move from the size of the circumference of the rear tire and that direct link between RPM and speed, and as you're moving the bike around, what Mark mentioned a moment ago. And I just wanted to zoom in a little bit where you can actually see the RPM come up as he's got this bike leaned well over, and then he's starting to open up. This is degrees per second, so it's not lean angle, but it's how quickly he's changing direction. And so you can kind of see where he's heading here and what the RPM is changing depending on how far he's got the bike leaned over, and that contact patch is circumference is getting smaller and the contact patch gets smaller. So there's only so much grip that's available when he's leaned way over. Is that a fairly true way of stating that, Mark?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay, so Mark mentioned it a couple times. I just wanted to zoom in on the data so everybody could maybe see it a little bit as well. So I'm going to jump back out. Let's rescale that gyro angle. Gyro angle. Maybe you can give us some bikes in the ECU have a true lean angle. You lay that bike over at 45 degrees. You're going through a carousel corner down here at the end. At the end of the lap, or the keyhole at Mid Ohio, and it just reads 45 degrees all the way around. Everybody, you understand that, right? But the gyro, which everybody that has a GPS sensor is going to have this data, even if your your ECU doesn't have a true lean angle. Your gyro, your GPS underbar gyro channel, is telling us how quickly you're laying the bike over in degrees per second. Right? So if you were to lean this thing over at 45 and hold it forever, the GPS gyro is going to come back to 0 even though the bike is over. So it's really how fast you're leaning the bike back and forth. And Mark and I chatted about this a little bit earlier. Maybe you can give your ideas between those two and which one you would like to use. And certainly all of your AIM data has the GPS gyro, and we don't always have that lean angle. Give us a little bit of background in your mind of using those two.
Yeah, I like the gyro. I've been using it for a long time, and what I like to do is if you right click on the channel on the left there, I like to, right now it's in my head, it's backwards. I'm looking at the lap going from start to finish. I'm looking at it going to the right, and so the first part of that is going the opposite direction. So I like to reverse the channel so that looks like it's going left in my head, so it's easier to talk about that way.
And so what Mark had me do here is he was looking at this channel as it sits, and we're going through turn 1 here. I know the cursor's over here, but since I got this box open, I can't put it there. But when he's turning here to the left, he would like this bit of feedback to actually be above 0, right? Instead of negative 20 degrees per second. And for the way he handles it or wants it, how it works in his mind, is he'd love to see that be a positive number. So he has worked out a way of coming into the data, and you do this with any channel, by the way. It's not just this one, but it'd be a great time to show everybody how this kind of works. We right-clicked on the gyro. It brings up this measures information box, and since you entered this box coming from a right click on the channel name, it's already got that channel selected. And here's all the information about that channel. You could change the name. Please don't do that. That's, you can, but it's telling you what the units are. It's telling you what the scaling is right now. But what you have over here is one more thing that Mark is using. You can just literally just reverse this channel. Just change the values, right? So I've click that box, and I'm going to apply and exit, and watch down here below when I hit the apply and exit, watch what this channel does. You see that it just flipped, and some channels are going to be that way. There are conventions in motorsports where your lateral G's typically for left-hand corners, they're going to be negative numbers. Positive right-hand corners are going to be positive numbers for your lateral G's. Braking, longitudinal G's, it's typically negative for braking and positive when you're on the throttle. But if that is not something, if it just works better for you to work it the other way, you have an option now to go in and change that really quickly with this measures information box. So that's what Mark has done there. Now, Mark, maybe you can continue on with that discussion of lean angle versus gyro and how you use it.
Yeah, I use it. I use that gyro to see where people are turning in. Also, if you have two different, if you pull up and put another lap on there, I mean, I'm probably most likely doing things pretty close to the same every lap.
Yep.
But if someone that I'm comparing myself to, it's really easy to see how they're turning. If they're turning in, if they're how they're standing the bike up. And like, say you can go to the keyhole, into the keyhole, you can see my lean angle
there. Yep.
Yep. You can see my lean angle versus throttle. And it's, for me, it's like, are you standing the bike up? Are you keeping it on the side of the tire too long? Are you getting it up? Are you getting any wheel spin? Are you having to get off the throttle because you're getting wheel spin? I use the gyro all the time. It's easy way to to kind of get a lean angle channel without having a channel. So a lot of the new stuff have a lean angle channel, but it works good. I like it.
Yeah, perfect. And all of you that have a Solo, even if it's not connected to your ECU, you've got this GPS gyro channel, so it's something you can kind of start to study and understand how it works. Perfect. Perfect. Let's jump back out. Let's turn off one of those laps and continue on a little bit. What is we've talked about lean angle. We've talked about throttle application. We've talked about brake pressure. I turned that off a little bit ago, but we had brake pressure before. Another one that's kind of interesting, and this happens to be a math channel that you wrote that was added to your Evo 4, and people can, we can chat about how to build that in the future. But you have this wheel speed difference where you're just taking on your Evo 4, Evo 4S, you've created a math channel where it's just taking the front wheel speed versus the rear wheel speed. And at 50, when the answer is 50, the front tire and the rear tire is the same speed. I'm going to change that to a color that we can see a little bit better for everybody. Kind of interesting to see that if it's above, if it's above, the rear tire is slower, or the front tire is faster than the rear tire. So right here you happen to be about 51%, and it's because you're under braking, and the rear tire is a little bit slower. The one that's fun to look at right here though is coming off of the keyhole. We seen when you tried to get after the throttle a couple of times, and to see how the rear tire all of a sudden, and one down here as well, how all of a sudden the rear tire was faster than the front tire coming off with this 200 horsepower monster as you're getting after the throttle. Try to explain that just a little bit in some more depth.
Well, I did that channel just because when I'm trying to figure out separation between wheelie control and traction control in the flash that I use. So I wanted to see the front versus the back, and if I could get a spike, and then I could look at other channels in the data to see what I can change in the flash to make that, for me, the goal was to try to make the wheelie control better without without having too much traction control. I run like pretty much the lowest amount of traction control that I can get, because I don't want it. I'm old school. I've been doing this for 30 years, and I don't really want something dragging me down in the middle of the corner. And that's what happens a lot of time. The rider aids are good, but it does slow you down in certain areas. So, but the wheelie control is, when at Mid-Ohio, once I figured out the separation of wheelie control, using the data to figure out what to change in the flash, it was almost a 3/4 of a second difference, because I could get to throttle, and the bike I could get to full throttle, and it would just bring up the wheel and set it back down. And that's lap times. I mean, so.
And I'm going to zoom in here on this one particular spot. Again, this is your warm-up lap, your first hot lap. I'm going to zoom in on that area where you're on and off the throttle here. And what's interesting to me is, I'm going to pull this over where we can all see it a little bit better. You started to roll into the throttle. You're starting to stand the bike up here from the gyro angle, right? We can see that, and you're certainly accelerating. The RPM is sitting there. What's interesting is you came out of the throttle right here, which and the distinction being where the two big tires spin. Truly, the rear tire got faster than the front. Is not for another 200 feet from when you first got after this. So this clearly then says this was wheelie control stuff happening early, and here the second one a little bit probably as well, and then all of a sudden the rear tire started spinning faster. So these two were more of a traction control deal, and the first two were wheelie control. Is that how you would read that as well?
Yeah, that's how I read it.
Yeah, interesting. With my data experience and not having a ton of traction control, that side of it, and wheelie control, certainly, I would have looked at this right at first and thought, okay, that was just you manipulating the rear tire speed. But in this case, that's not true, because we're looking at our rear tire spin, and we know that because of that, now we know that this was wheelie control, not not tire spin. So if you have the option of having those wheel speeds and you have a bike that has this kind of information, this is like Mark just said, I mean, it was 3 or 4 tenths just by tweaking when it did, you know, the wheelie control versus the traction control. Kind of interesting stuff that you can see in the data. Perfect. Let me jump back out. Okay, and there another big one down here. This is what do you call this part of the track right here?
That's heading into Thunder Valley. That's
into Thunder Valley. Look at the tire spin there, right? But that's the biggest one. We've got our little triangle here telling us that's the biggest spot.
Yeah, that is a crest of a hill right there. You kind of crest over the top and.
Perfect. Okay, and I didn't see wheelie control on that particular one. I see more just tire spin, traction control side. So
correct.
Okay. So any other spot on this one here that you'd want to chat about before we maybe go look at some data from Kentucky and then go look at some Google Earth stuff. Anything else you want to chat about on this one?
Not unless anybody wants to see any part of. I mean, there's off the back straightaway through Madness and stuff. That's pretty important to get around Mid Ohio, but time wise, it's up to you.
Perfect. I see Chris has thrown a question in there, not a question, but a math formula, which is true, and I should have thought about this one, and I should have had it in place. Thank you, Chris. He's thrown up there is in the AIM math channels, there is a bike angle channel that will take the GPS gyro, the speed, and do some math in behind the scenes and actually give you a bike angle as well from the math channel functionality. So if you were to type that in, just as Chris just shows it right there, and we'll have that in the notes for this webinar after we get it up on YouTube, you'll be able to cut and paste or take a look at that, and you'll be able to cut that in and get more of a true lean angle. It's calculated, so maybe it's not perfect, but I found it to be pretty good. Thank you, Chris, for putting that in there. Okay. So
actually, also, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
So
go ahead, Mark.
when you do have like the Yamaha R1 has a lean angle sensor in the data, it's pretty close with the gyro on stuff that I've used.
Okay.
Also, so
perfect. All really good information. It's just whichever one works for the person that's doing it, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. The other thing that we did chat about before we leave Mid Ohio was was throttle position. How long are you on throttle? You already mentioned it as part of the first part leading into this. Is boy, your throttle position is linked. Often there's only so much available to you. If you've got the bike leaned way over, there's only so much throttle it's going to take. So being able to stand that bike up is going to allow you to get to throttle. We're going to talk about that in driving line a little bit more, how you take a different driving line on a bike than you would in a car, mainly because your goal is to get that thing stood up so you can get after the throttle as early as possible. I'd love to show a histogram here of throttle position and how much time you're on the throttle for a lap here at Mid Ohio, and let's pick the faster lap. I'm gonna go to your fastest lap of the three that we've got here. I've created a user profile just for showing Mid Ohio throttle position. Let's load that. And what I've got here is a throttle position in the upper half just in our strip chart, in our measures graph. And then I've created just a very quick histogram. And a histogram, if you haven't, we haven't done a ton on them yet here in the webinars, but it's this little button here, icon here at the top. And what a histogram is nothing more than taking the channel that you have active, and we're going to add a channel here in a minute probably, and it looks at the amount of data that you have viewed in your measures graph, in this case the entire lap 4 here of this run, and it tells you how much time or percent that you are spending at what percentage of throttle. I'm going to open up the options button here just really quickly so everybody can see. What I've done on this one is I've told it I want the histogram type in percentage of the lap. You can do it in time, so you could have it in seconds, but I've told it percentage. I want to show these values, and you can see the values showing here on each of what we call the bins. And then I've told it I want 10 bins. And since this is a 0 to 100% throttle, so each of these bins is 10% of the throttle position. So it's 0 to 100, 0 to 10%, 10 to 20, 20 to 30, and so on. And I've set it up as 10. So I'm going to exit out of that. And then the other thing you can do is here between 30 and 40%. If I click on that, you can see that, of course, it says the same thing, 7.2% between 30 and 40% throttle. Boy, you can see that it's interesting that how much time you on a bike you spend 43.5% between 0 and 10% throttle. Mark, how do you, when you look at this, is this what you would expect, number one, and then number two, what do you do with this bit of information? How would you use that to understand lap by lap, or you versus a student and looking at how much time people are spending on the throttle?
Well, I mean, one of the first things I do, when somebody comes to me and wants to go faster is, I just look, first thing on the data is look and see if they're getting to 100%. And a lot of times it takes some, especially on 1,000, really, it's going fast, and distance, like coming out of last turn at Mid Ohio, heading to turn 1, it's fast. So getting to full throttle is one of the hardest things to do on 1,000. I recommend starting off with a smaller bike to get to full throttle. It's like, if you look at, I'm only 2% full throttle. That doesn't make me look very good.
For this lap, yeah.
For this lap, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
And it looks like I'm coasting, under 10%, but on 1,000, a lot's happening, and you spend a majority of your time part throttle and getting to throttle. That's why, for me, when I'm flashing ECUs, that's I'm using data to make the bike better in those areas, because that's where you are on 1,000. So just and seeing lean angle versus that throttle also is, when I'm doing a school, I have a chart up, and it's showing lean angle, 100% throttle, it's pretty much 5% lean angle. If you're at 40 degrees of if you're at your 100% lean angle, you really can only get to 5% throttle or 10% throttle before you have to straighten up, before you're spinning up.
Yeah.
So the histogram it's good, especially for the newer riders to have something like a goal. Okay, I want to get to 3% on the back straightaway or on a lap. So
interesting that you mentioned it earlier that for those of us that maybe only have a solo and don't have the lean angle, the GPS gyro being something, or Chris's math channel that he mentioned a little bit earlier. So since that's the combination that we're looking at, let's bring up throttle position versus lean angle in our measures graph. I'm going to change the color of the gyro so it stands out a little bit more for us maybe. And then we've got these two stacked here in our histogram, and we can see visually with the line graphs, and we can see that you're at full throttle for here coming up from the start finish towards turn 1, and lean angle nearly 0, just as you just mentioned, and that and here getting out, coming out of the keyhole, you're getting to full throttle, but you're within that, you're very close to being stood up, right? And and talk about how this represents that combination of lean angle versus when you can be at throttle. The blue being the gyro, or the degrees per second that you're changing the bike, very closely related to lean angle, and then red being throttle position.
Yeah, I mean, basically when you're coming out of on a motorcycle, you're all the way leaned over, and you're getting, I like to get to maintenance throttle, and it kind of gets the suspension to take a set, and then it's a progressive and to the throttle's opening, and then as that throttle opening, you're already looking at the edge of the track, you're picking the bike up as you're bringing the throttle in, and it's just important that too much throttle too quick at the wrong lean angle is a problem, and then standing the bike up too quick and running off the edge of the track is a problem. And the most of the people that I see out there are not, you know, when they're not finishing the corner, they're just on the edge of the tire so long, and you just like, especially Madness. Madness is a famous corner at Mid Ohio for people crashing, and usually it's a spin out the rear, and what they're doing is, you know, they're coming off the back straightaway, and then most of the people that are having the problem are really not taking the right line in the Madness. What they're doing is they're just kind of swooping over to the right to go left over the top, and then you're staying at that lean angle for so long, and then you're looking at turn 9 at the bottom of the hill, and you're starting to get gas, and then you just spin right out. You know, it's one of the, you know, one of the biggest places in Mid Ohio where you can have too much lean angle and too much throttle in an instant. So, you know, it's just,
sometimes you give up a little bit there in order to get the bike straight up. Maybe you slow down your apex speed at the end of the back straightaway, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Hard to do. Hard to always pull back to go faster, right?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. Just kind of an interesting graph here where it's showing that almost 0% is of you know, low on throttle is all down here where you're really leaned the bike over. Kind of interesting understanding. So okay, well, perfect. Anything else you want to add here from the Mid Ohio data before we jump over to the Kentucky NCM data?
Nope.
Okay. Let's close this data really quickly. I see some questions over there. We'll chat about some of those in just a second. And here, let's jump into this NCM data. This is a track that Mark seems to really like. Very, very technical, especially on a bike. Lots of corners, decreasing radiuses, increasing radiuses, that all sorts of interesting things, and a good long front straightaway. That gives us some ideas to go back and kind of start to end this, at least on our planned information, on how we tie this together with driving line and what is perfect. So what Mark's gonna talk about this data a little bit, take us wherever he wants to go, and then we're gonna bring up, we have already exported it, and then we're gonna bring it up in Google Earth and really start to look at the driving line for these 3 laps, just to, but also then have him just look at the track layout and say, why is it that those areas like he just talked about at Mid Ohio, where maybe you don't hustle the one part of the corner and get the bike stood up, and you know, and maybe take a little bit different approach than you would maybe in a car. Anything about this particular data you'd like to look at before we jump out or tell us about NCM, and then look at it before we jump out to Google Earth?
My comments on NCM are, I mean, it's if you haven't been there, you should try it. It's an awesome place to go. Grip is great. It's fast. It's very fast, and you know, I mean, I think there's over 140 mile an hour in 3 places, right?
Yeah, 140. You got 3 peaks here in the speed, right? And the lowest of the 3 peaks is 147. The highest one here being about 164.
Yeah,
on this particular session.
And then the bus stop is 40 miles an hour.
Yeah, I seen that right at 40.
Yeah, so it really is it's a tough track to learn, but you know, a couple days there and you can pick it up. The basic for me and NCM, when someone hands me some data, is the line. I mean, it's the hardest thing for people to learn there. But if you want to wait and go over that once we get into
yeah, let's bring up these 3 laps, and I'm going to zoom in and just to take a quick look, right? And but we can start to see where maybe a driver has taken a different bit of a line in this one little section of NCM. You're coming this direction, right? You're coming around the outside here.
That's correct, yeah.
And in this particular one, if you zoom in enough on the GPS data, you can see on this one red line. If I zoom in a lot, you can see that there's the 3 lines. If I come back out, a little bit different line approaching this on his middle of these 3 laps, and maybe a little bit different here through the apex itself. And but I just want to show it here in the AIM data first. You know, you can see where he maybe hit was pretty tight through the middle of this one. and then what we'll do is we'll take it out into Google Earth and study even more than just this one corner, but just maybe how you attack a corner on a motorcycle might be slightly different. Boy, you can see it down here as well. Substantially different line on that red line. So whenever you let me know when you're ready, then we'll head out to Google Earth whenever, if you want to take a look at something else.
Yeah, I don't unless there's any specific question about NCM. It's a weird place. It's probably more in the Google Earth to talk about lines. Okay. Lines is the most important there.
Let's bring it open real quickly. This is we've shown it in webinars before. While you're in Race Studio, if you want this imagery from the back side, you go to File and Data Export, and you can select the test that you have open. Obviously selected for you. You pick what you want, what laps you want to send out. I sent all 3 of his fast laps here, and then we bring it Google Earth, a free download that you can grab, and then on your computer, then you can start to look at that data and have the Google Earth imagery in the background. This is an option that you're going to have when we release Race Studio 3 analysis. This imagery will be in the back natively inside of Race Studio 3 analysis. So right now, this is the best way for us to go ahead and take a look at that. I've tried to color these similarly. Certainly the same 3 colors. It looks like I may have missed on which one was which, but here let's talk about this series of corners. Is maybe a good example of what most often we would see in some of the car stuff that we've talked about is maybe you'd come off of this corner and you'd try to get the car over here driver's left so you can arc this in a little bit more. Maybe there's a difference over here as well. Kind of walk us around, starting from back over here, Mark, and walk us around this series of corners and how you would attack that on a bike and what's different.
Yeah, so when you're coming up this section, it's I believe it's topping out 4th gear right when it hits that curb on the left. And you're trying to straight line that as much as you can. And if you're on, say, a Ninja 400 or a 600, still fast enough that it's hard to get over to the left once you're charging that section. I know I've driven this. I worked for the Lucas Oil School, and I've driven one of their cars there, and I was definitely swinging over to the left because it just was only 100-mile-an-hour entrance.
Oh, okay.
So on a faster bike, you spend too much time coming off the throttle to move over, because when you're doing you're doing 140 right there, and you're trying to get the bike over to the left to turn right. It's just you can't do it unless you chop the throttle to get it over. You can't manhandle it over to get the best possible turn in and apex there. So I end up getting into that corner and just turning in early, and then apexing early, and then concentrate on the drive out of there. And it all depends on the size of your bike. For sure, on the car side, you can get over. It's easy to steer over there, but on a motorcycle, you're just going so fast, and you can't get it over to the left unless you breathe it. And if you breathe it, then you're losing time. So it's better to just come up. You end up being close to the center of the track. It's not, but when you do turn in a little bit early, and there's a lot of room through there, and you kind of apex and stay tight for a little bit, and then pick up your reference point on the exit, and then you're back to throttle right in the beginning of that curving. You're already back to throttle, rushing out of that corner. Yeah.
Again, but the concept of back here not being able to get it over to the left is because you've already went to wide open throttle, and you can't lean the bike over, because when you get to the lean angle, you got less grip, and it just won't take it. So if you were to try to get over here, you'd have to get out of the throttle to get there, like you said, but it's because of the lean angle and manhandling the bike over. So it's better just to go ahead and straight line it and give up maybe just a little bit of absolute physics of cornering, because you've gained so much time in this spot. So it's the part of the lane angle thing, not just that it's super fast. You could be even faster to get into this, but you just can't get over there and be as fast because of the lane angle and the traction that's available while you have that. So
right. And if you think about throttle versus lean angle, it's different for each size bike. I mean, a Ninja 400 can take a lot more throttle at 30 degrees lean angle than
Oh,
a
there you go.
GSX-R 1000. So it's all relative to what kind of bike you're riding.
Okay.
So
Perfect. This looks pretty classic down here, right? You end up out here over here on driver's left, rider's left, and then you arc it in, right? But
yeah,
you're not quite even getting down there to the apex, at least in the imagery here. Is that true?
I think my knees, I mean, if you think of the bike,
Ah,
my knees extended probably over the curbing right there.
ah,
And then it's weird on a motorcycle. So when you're leaning over, that solo is basically probably a good 12, 15 inches, off the center of the motorcycle, because you're when you're leaned over.
another large difference in bikes. Let's make sure everybody understands that too. When the bike is up and you have that solo, or your antenna is maybe on the back fender, on a permanent install. But when you lay that bike over, the GPS sensor has moved over, the height of that bike. And if you're leaned over it to 45, 50 degrees or 60 degrees, now all of a sudden that antenna is actually moving around a little bit. He's actually not the line. He may even be another foot or two out here, with the tire patch, compared to where the GPS sensor is assuming it's at, because of the lean angle. So another interesting difference in bikes versus cars. So
Yeah.
perfect.
And then so after that first right-hander there, you start. It's a downhill section, and the second right-hander is actually the base of that hill. So it right there, it's a pretty tight apex. You're basically back to throttle from that first right-hander, charging down that hill, and then it's an off throttle, and you're actually in between that right-hander and the left-hander. When you're basically coming up over the crest of another hill.
Okay.
So what a lot of people do there, that I teach not to do, is people swing right there, and then so they're off the throttle, and they're swinging right to turn left over the top of that. And what they're doing right there is they're not loading their tire. So if you come down that hill and you charge that left-hander pretty much in the middle of the track, and then you're apexing in the beginning of that curving right there. And when you're on the brakes to set your speed into there, you're loading your front tire. When you're swinging right to go over the top of that, you're basically your front tire is not loaded. So there's a lot of crashes over the top of that, just understeer, crashing, losing the front. So that section right there, those four corners, that corner there is the one that eats bikes basically.
And again, back to what we've talked about in previous webinars with car stuff, and obviously physics are the same. The track, the slope of the track, if all of a sudden you're going uphill like you are here, and then it crests over the top, all of a sudden all that load you've got on the tire is going to go away no matter what you do, right? And coming off of this then is a problem. So driving to the slope of the track is something that's the driver's job to maximize those elevation changes and altitudes and percent of slopes. So keep that in mind as well. It's kind of interesting. Perfect. We're getting to the point where I think we got to start to close it up, but I want to go through these the questions and answers. Mark, if you can kind of start up.
Sure.
Some of these we're not going to be able to do here today or explain deeply, and we can come back, or some of these maybe you can email Mark and get some deeper questions answered. What is the procedure when looking at chassis data with data, speed of suspension, positions of suspension, mid-corner exit, etc.? Procedure on that is outside the scope of what we can probably handle here. But if I go back, and I'll just show it to you really quickly, but we won't talk about it deeply. This particular data did not have shock sensors, but let me open it up really quickly since we're here. Let me close this one. Let me reopen Mid-Ohio. And you can see that we do have a shock and a fork data here, and you can see when he has planted the front end by being on the brakes and using the brakes to make sure that front, the weight transfer is such. That particular question there is probably a little deeper than what we can do here. We have plans of having suspension analysis direct webinars in the future. If not, we tape them during a webinar like this, or we tape them and put them straight to YouTube, where we can have a suspension expert in here and chat about this kind of a thing. So I do appreciate the question. I just think it's a little outside of where we probably ought to go today. We see a good example of a friction circle for a bike. I would love to do that. It's going to look similar to what the other ones were, but let's leave that for the advanced one as well. I think that maybe we should have prepared for that a little bit more, but I think that would work in a more of an advanced one. You see anything in there that jumps up at you, Mark, that you'd like to tackle, or are they all fairly in depth?
Yeah, they are. Might be for the next one.
Can you bring up horsepower to weight ratio as a reason for low full throttle? If this is so, horsepower to weight ratio, it's grip,
Yeah.
The answer to that is yes, but it's going to vary on a number of things, not just fuel level, I suppose, right? Bike weight, slope of the track, grip in the tire, all that kind of stuff. How often do you use modeled data, i.e. a math channel with max RPM rate of change, the derivative of RPM, we can do a math channel pretty quickly with that, to interpret how close you are to the bike's acceleration? With what you have with some of the ECU stuff that's built in there with traction control and all that, that's what you are attempting to do with your rear tire speeds and some other things. But have you considered doing it with a RPM, the rate of change, the acceleration of the of the RPM channel? Have you thought about that?
I mean, that's definitely a good idea. I mean,
Okay.
I'm just like everybody else here, and
Yeah.
I'm learning every day. I learn something new what we can do with this. That's a great idea.
Yeah, certainly. What the question digs into deeper that maybe Andrew is asking that maybe some people wouldn't understand real quickly is you're not just looking at the acceleration of the bike, right? But you can actually look at the steepness of the RPM line, and when you have tire spin or something, all of a sudden this will jump up at a higher rate. Maybe this is on the way down, but you can see how this is coming down and all of a sudden there's a spike up. We could look at the difference in how quickly how steep that line is of the RPM channel and try to help with a little bit of the wheelie control, the traction control and all that. So Andrew came up with an idea that maybe Mark will go back and look at as well. So perfect. Perfect. We're right there at the end, but we've kind of handled all the questions and answers that were in the box that were given to us for live. There are some that were answered. Some other stuff that maybe was in the chat box. All of these will be available to. It takes us a day or two to compile these and edit the questions that were asked. They always end up in the if you didn't have a chance to watch those and you wanted to watch the screen and listen to where Mark was pointing and talking about. Maybe you didn't follow along with the questions. Those will all be created into a PDF document and put into the description box of the YouTube video once it's over on YouTube here. We'll get the video up within the next hour or so, and then we'll within a day or two the questions and answers will be over there in a nice PDF format. So give us a little bit of a time for that, and we will do that. I'm going to go back and share. Go back to the PowerPoint and jump ahead of screen. The training and support, boy, we're all happy. Some of us are getting out to the tracks. I know a lot of you are as well. Looking forward to it. This video and many others will be out on our YouTube site. Over 70 now and growing. At least a couple a week here as we continue to do these. We're so looking forward to seeing all of you guys out at the track. But until we can meet you out there, make sure you drop us email or give us a call. Any questions you might have with what we've covered today or stuff that you need a little bit of help on. What is our next webinar? This is one that we get a lot of questions on. The polls have absolutely driven. I was actually going to shove this one back a little bit more, but I think we're going to push it ahead. I'm calling it creating a new track map in RaceStudio 2 analysis, but I want you to know that it's a little deeper than that. What we're not just going to go through the options and push the buttons and make a track map. What I think more people are asking for, at least the direct emails I get, not just the polls, but the direct emails and phone calls, is they want to know how to build a good track map, right? And so what we're looking for here is to come in and we're going to talk about the button pushing and the slider bars and how these things kind of work, but we're going to go into a little bit deeper and how does RaceStudio create these segments, and then how do we create those segments or change them, edit them, create our own into building track maps that are much more useful to something that you might want to do. Maybe you're checking your braking, maybe you're driver performance, rider performance, and you want to break it into segments. Maybe you want to just check your brake pads and you only want to break it into braking zones, and how to build those splits where a good split report or your segment report is not affected by that, a 5-foot difference of when you hit the brakes or got back on the throttle. And so we're going to talk about that, and how to build a good track map. So that's what we're going to do in a couple of days on Thursday, June 4th. We're going to talk a little bit deeper on track maps, and of course we'll be taking your questions at that time, and maybe building some track maps in different ways as we have some suggestions. So keep that in mind. That's what we're going to do in just a couple of days on Thursday, June 4th. Creating a new track map. And kind of in closing, I'd like to thank Mark for coming with us. There's his contact information. Mark is the motorcycle expert. Does a lot of data work and a lot of course, just tons and tons of coaching. Chats with people all over. Mark, would you like to add anything as we're kind of closing up? Any other last thoughts before we close her down?
Just appreciate to be able to do this. It was good. First time doing a webinar, and I had fun. So
you did a great job. You did a great job. We prepared a little bit, and we got some different kinds of data, and I think it hopefully it helps, and some of the guys that are using it in motorcycles thinking it was different. But at the end of this, I want everybody to understand that data analysis is data analysis. Maybe you look in a slightly different way on a bike, and maybe that driven line is slightly different, but the AIM Race Studio data analysis is just giving us the tools to look at it and understand, what happened, where did it happen, and why did it happen. And sometimes that why is slightly different on a motorcycle versus an off-road truck versus a sports car. But the data logger itself, all the tips and tricks we use today can be used on anything else, and everything we've talked about in other webinars coming up here can be used on motorcycles. It's just the fine detailed differences, which I think people were interested in. I think we hit on a lot of them. So thank you again, Mark. Again, we'll be back on Thursday, June 4th, talking about track maps, and I look forward to seeing you all there. Talk to you guys soon.
Thanks.